Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you today. My name is Dustin Corman. This is How to Rock Astrology. Today we're going to be giving an introduction to a much revered book of mine, a common item on my personal all-the-time bookshelf. It's Nakshatra, the Authentic Heart of Vedic Astrology, by none other than our boy, Dicara. This is an incredible book, an incredible volume. Very important. Today we're going to give an introduction to how to use the book and what the book is about and what it's for. Underlining the book's importance in our understanding and our studying of the 27 nakshatras, particularly in studying the 27 sutras of an ancient part of what's called the Krishna Yajurveda. It's called the Titaria Brahmana. It was an anciently derived commentary or secondary writing about the Krishna Yajurveda. It was considered a Brahmana, which was written by the rishis, or ancient seers, who attended to the same consciousness as the original Vedic lore and Vedic literature. The purveyors of this consciousness, at some point in history, right in the bridge between the old Vedic ways and the kind of modern age of Osiris, where man was realizing that we have a part in the divine play of the divine energies within and outside of us, mankind started to sculpt natal horoscopes. And the ancient Vedic lore of the Devatas of the Vedas needed to get gripped, needed some sort of schema to express themselves through a modern astrological context that befits the modern problems of humans of today. And that's around the time in ancient days. There was the way Vedic ancient times of the Vedic scripture. Then there was an in-between period when these Titaria Brahmana sutras were made, which still had a foot in the celestial divine Vedic consciousness. After that, there were many texts written about the nakshatras, which had a scientific, rational, logical faculty, intuition. Great liberties were taken by commentators and medieval writers on the nakshatras, and the essential Vedic essence of the nakshatras became skewed. Dicara is one of the primary people of today who are churning, who are separating the wheat from the chaff and the runny milk from the cream of those scriptures and sutras of the ancient Vedic sciences of the Vedas, which held the essence of the nakshatras in Vedic consciousness. And so that's what his whole shtick is really all about, and that is the consciousness which pervades this book. I highly recommend it. Today in particular, we're going to be talking about the introduction to the Nakshatra Sutras of the Titaria Brahmana. Dicara himself, he is an American. He lives in Japan now, interestingly, but his claim to fame before he became a huge, well-known astrologer on YouTube, he was in a band. He was in a punk band, and he had a real angst to set things right in society. I'm a punk musician myself, and I'm just so deeply inspired by Vic. He's such a cool guy. I got one cool picture of him being in his band called 108, which is a sacred number. I always thought that was very cool. Dicara is himself, so he's a punk musician. He's kind of on this idea of, he likes to present to the world of why it's wrong about these ancient things. He's born in the year of the water dog. The dog tends to be a holder of the old temple ways. And I see a lot of this peace-seeking consciousness in him, in the way that he does his thing for the world. Kind of just does it all, just like many people on YouTube, does it all out of the goodness of his heart, puts out these videos. He's passionate about teaching, and I highly recommend all of his consciousness. He's a part of a burgeoning, bigger movement in the world of modern astrology today. And as I've been talking about, I'm going to say the same quote that I've been saying in all the videos in this series. It's my hope that this video series informs you of the growing movement of tropical-based Vedic astrologers who use tropical-based measurements to define the Rashis, and who avidly use the nakshatras in their natal horoscope readings through the scriptural authority given from the Vedic era text, the Titaria Brahmana. And that is the book that we're going to be talking about today. Vic himself, this whole book is giving a concise transcription of the Nakshatra Sutras, which, if you've read in my video previous to this, in my video talking about Ernst Wilhelm's depiction of the Nakshatras, the Titaria Brahmana is written in sutras, which is meant to be cryptic, which is meant to be enigmatic. Ernst Wilhelm gives the metaphor that if you were to really understand the energy of something, it's hard to explain, right? Imagine an Amazon man. Ernst Wilhelm gives an example of an Amazon man, a lost tribesman who's never seen electricity, never heard of technology before. And he comes to modern day Rio de Janeiro, and he goes to put a wire into an electrical socket. Now you stop him and you say, hey, stop, you don't realize what you're doing. And the man looks at you and says, what are you talking about? What do you mean? What the heck's going to happen? And then you try to explain to him. How do you explain what might happen to him? You could just go, you'll take it, your body will go like this. And you'll start like convulsing like a cartoon character, like Mickey Mouse sticking his tail into an electrical outlet. And the man looking at you will be very confused because he'll be like, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to express right now? And you're like, it's like this. And the person looking at you is like, what is this nut trying to tell me? Now, he may be very confused. He might have no concept, no clue as to what it is that you're trying to tell him. But you were accurate to the energy. You were displaying the energy, even though to him it appears as nonsense. This is the nature. That is a sutra. A sutra is supposed to appear nonsensical until you've had the experience of the energy of the sutra, of the nakshatra. Then once you've had the aha moment of the nakshatra, only then will you understand the nonsense of the sutras. Now, it appears nonsensical and enigmatic because it's kind of like the head of a snake, which has a whole trail of wisdom behind it, but all you see is the head. You have to intuit what the deeper meaning of the sutra is implying. And that's what Vic does a great job of, providing us the tools through which we can intuit and get that aha moment ourselves. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Essentially, I'm going to talk about the preface and the introduction to the book. So we're going to start off with the preface to Vic Dicara's Nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology. Now, what Vic tells us is that the idea for this book formed at the end of 2017 at a Vedic astrology conference in Arizona when Vic Dicara met Ernst Wilhelm, actually, and he said, what's new? What's going on, man? Because these guys hang out, which is so cool. And Ernst told Vic that Ernst and his wife were working on a translation of Nakshatra Sutra from Titaria Brahmana. And Vic was floored because he had been trying to study the nakshatras for 8 years before this. The entire time consistently dismayed by the lack of a clear, universally accepted, sensible approach to the nakshatras. It seemed that every third person had some other theory about how we should define the symbolism of the nakshatras. Now, Vic set out to understand the nakshatras as deeply and clearly as possible, using only what the Vedas gave, which is the name and the god. trying to make sense of the many prevailing theories through this. And the result was his first book on the nakshatras, which is called 27 Stars, 27 Gods. It's a good historical effort, although this book has changed his internal schema, which means that this is the book that you want to read. It was a satisfying effort, but Vix tells us that he hungered for something more concrete and authoritative. So, when Ernst mentioned that the Titaria Brahmana had something about the nakshatras, Vic felt like a man dying of thirst in the desert who suddenly finds out that an oasis is nearby. Ernst directed Vic to PDFs of the original Sanskrit, and Vic immediately began devouring that PDF in heart, mind, and soul. Wonderful of Ernst to have made that connection. Now, it turned out that David Frawley had already written a translation of the Titaria Brahmana about 20 years ago, but no one had ever brought it to Vic's attention. Now, after an initial look at the original language, Vic could see why Dr. Frawley's translation didn't catch on and become influential. Although a great work, Vic does say it was a great, important historical step. It didn't include the original language. It wasn't explained quite thoroughly enough in his opinion, and it mixed some of Dr. Frawley's ideas with a medieval commentators and the original text all together, without clearly giving the reader as a heads up as to which was which. And so finally, it didn't really catch the essence of two important key words found in every sutra, which we know is Padastat, the from above, and Avastat, the from below, which will be explained in a moment. Ernst's translation was much better, but Vic says that he thought it also often suffered from not really expressing the essence of the words, especially those two key words, the Parstat and Avastat. Ernst's version also did not have clear explanations of the individual sutras. Now, Vic offered to help him edit and finish it, but Ernst and his wife had already been working on it for a long time. They were nearly done, and they wanted to just publish it right away. They encouraged Vic to publish his own translation and commentary, which he immediately set out to do. Now, this is just him describing how the book came about. An attendee at the conference named Lakshmi Mukundan had grown up studying Sanskrit, so he eagerly availed of her knowledge to confirm the basic grammars of the sutras. And through that, he sketched out the first rough translations and commentaries for all 27 sutras. Then, to confirm the technical accuracy of the translations and edit the Sanskrit overall, he turned to the help of Yulia Mameva. Then, at the end, he got the help of Matishka Anandan, to which Vic is indebted to the kindness of all three of these people. This book contains a bit more than Nakshatra Sutra, and this is some of the best parts of this book, actually. In his commentary and in an appendix, Vic includes other sections from the same Titaria Brahmana that also talk about the nakshatras. It's a complete set of fascinating supplications to each nakshatra, and a description of the relevance of many nakshatras in electional astrology. So that in each of his sections, you're going to see a little bit of oblations, a little bit of reverence and prayers to the nakshatra, and this comes not from Vic, but from the Titaria Brahmana itself. Finally, this is actually what I meant is the cool part that I love about this book. So excuse me for reiterating. I mentioned before that at the end of each sutra, there's a supplication, which is Vic's addition to the text, which is very useful. But no, this is the one that I think is interesting. He has supplemented the book with a section entitled The True Story of the Nakshatra Gods. And it's a dramatic narration of the 27 nakshatra divinities, focused on what is most relevant to their nakshatra's symbolism. This original story work that Vic put together. He tells the story in his own way. And it pulls together diverse Puranic and Vedic source material to paint a vivid picture of often unknown tales and details, essential for fully understanding the subtleties of the 27 Vedic stars. Very, 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 very useful stuff. And it's really important to get a sense of the guts of what this whole Nakshatra Sutra consciousness is trying to unfold. The stories of Jyesta are so meaningful and profound as to the character of everybody, but also particularly to the Nakshatra Jyesta. There's stories just about every nakshatra, important stories that give more information as to what each nakshatra means. Now, finally, without further ado, we can get to an introduction to Nakshatra Sutra and what exactly is going on in the Nakshatra Sutras. Vic begins by saying, the Nakshatra Sutra is a treasure found in the Titaria Brahmana, a branch of the ancient Yajur Veda. Because of this, it holds unique importance and unparalleled authority amongst astrology texts, for it allows us to understand the nakshatras in much clearer accord with the Vedic sages who originally envisioned them. For each sutra, Vic gives the original Sanskrit in Devanagari and in Roman diacritics. He gives an English translation, a word-by-word breakdown, and then a commentary that also explains the sutra's interpretive ramifications for natal astrology, and the important wisdom it provides us about life. He also includes a translation of Titaria's supplication to each nakshatra. And so that's what we mentioned, is a little supplication at the end. Vic gives a brief depiction of various planets in each nakshatra and how that planet might behave. That's some of the best interpretive writing on a planet in the nakshatra that I've read. Use this as a baseline and starting point. This is what Vic tells us. You got to use these as a baseline and starting point for interpreting the nakshatras effectively. But you got to modify that baseline using standard principles of chart analysis. Consider not just the fundamental nature of the planet, as is done here in the text itself. Like, for example, Mars is a malefic. It's going to have a harshness that is useful when it's in harsh nakshatras, but is not useful and even is obstructive when it's in a nakshatra that is supposed to be aligned with a more gentle, benefic nature. But you must consider not just the fundamental nature of the planet, as is done here in the text, but also the incidental nature that planet carries due to the houses that it owns and that it occupies. Because Mars, who is the ninth lord, as in the example of, for example, Leo rising, a Mars that is the ninth lord and the fourth lord, relating to the Dharma as well as emotional resonances and emotional wellness. That kind of a Mars is more auspiciously placed for the Leo and might do a little bit better in a nakshatra that has to do more with that benefic reality. It's still Mars. It's still going to have the harshness of Mars and still going to probably mess up that nakshatra, but not necessarily as badly as the auspicious nature of Mars for a Leo as the ninth lord kind of gives it a little bit more positive, auspicious reckoning. Again, though, that ultimately depends on the house that it's in and the aspects from other planets and etc. So we have to consider, whatever Vic gives us as an interpretation of a planet in a nakshatra, we must understand he's telling us here that we consider not just the fundamental nature of the planet, but also the incidental nature it carries due to the houses it owns and occupies, etc. I've talked about this in the Divine forces of the lunar nakshatras as Naisagarkika, which is like the original nature of the planet, and then the temporary nature of the planet, which has to do with the planet as a house lord. Now, without further ado, Vic tells us that each sutra has 4 parts, right? We've talked about this in our Ernst Wilhelm's Sutras introduction. The first part of every sutra names the god or goddess who owns the nakshatra. For example, here we have the nakshatra Kritika, and the Sanskrit that we read is Agnehe Kritikaha Shukram Parastaj Jyotir Avastat. Agnehe is the god Agni, and that represents the god, the Devata. And so, therefore, the first part of these sutras is the god that presides over the nakshatra. And it assumes the reader is intimately familiar with these divinities. In modern times, this is never the case. So, Vic explains the most relevant points in the commentary and supplements the entire text by including the true story of the nakshatra gods. So if you want to learn more about the gods that are talked about in each sutra, check out the end of the book to give you the big narrative picture of all the gods. Now, the second part names the nakshatra. The second part of the phrase is actually naming the nakshatra, which is an action done by the Devata, the presiding deity. For example, here we see the phrase Agnehe Kritikaha Shukram Parastaj Jyotir Avastat. This is the aphorism of Kritika. Agnehe is the deity, Agni, of Agni. And then Kritikaha is an action that Agni does. In this case, it's activation, doing, cataclysm. It's otherwise, Ernst Wilhelm describes the word Kritika as meaning white spots. It relates to semen, relates to the hot energy of fire at its whitest, hottest, when it is at the heat level where matter actually becomes undone and begins to burn up under the intense heat. So Agnehe is the deity, and Kritikaha is what it does. Now, what it does, the overall activity of the nakshatra is given in the name, usually. But the next parts show what the nakshatra needs to do what it does, and then the fourth part shows what is produced by doing what it does. Okay? So therefore, the third part describes what the nakshatra's action requires. This reveals what the nakshatra is dependent upon to function successfully, and thus identifies the nakshatra's weak point or dependency. For example, in Kritika, we see Agnehe Kritikaha Shukram Parastaj. This means fire. Agnehe is fire, and its cataclysm, its increasing its activity, needs fuel in order to create light. Shukram here is fuel. I would also translate it as the shukram relates to semen, it relates to sweetness, and in a way, I mean, technically it's closer to say that it relates to Venus. Really, what I think it's being put across here is something that relates to the self. Something that relates to the sun, the Atma. As Agni does, it relates to the sun in a lot of ways. It is the deity of the sun. And the sun expresses its highest and best nature through the nature of the self. So, the cataclysm of fire requires the fuel of selfness as its fuel, as it's from above. It requires from above selfness in order to produce Jyotir, which is illumination, light, and in my reckoning, self-illumination and self-realization. There's also Kundalini consciousness embedded in there in certain ways. There's really a lot of depth to each one of these sutras. But this is the main 4 parts. We've got the deity. In this case, the deity is Agni, Agnaha. We've got the action, which is preceded by the name of the nakshatra. In this case, that's Kritikaha, or Kritika. We've got the name of the deity, the action of the deity, the requirement of the deity, and the result of the deity's activity. So the result of the deity's successful activity when it is successful. So the 4th part describes the goal of the nakshatra's action, revealing the nakshatra's ultimate motive and effect. In each and every sutra, the 3rd part is indicated by the word parastat. The 4th part is indicated by the word avastat. The simplicity and elusive connotation of these 2 words is the biggest initial barrier to understanding the sutras effectively. It's essentially describing 3 different movements in one movement, which is a little bit tricky to understand until you see the thing moving. In the simplest literal terms, parastat means above and avastat means below. Understanding the implications of para and ava, however, is crucial to really get the way these 2 words are used in the sutras here. Para means above, in the sense of a supportive superior, like that of a parent. Every nakshatra has this parastat nature, a thing that supports it, shelters it, a thing that it needs to subduct from above. Subduct is a good word, if it hopes to achieve the goal of its action. Thus, the parastat really indicates what the nakshatra needs. Now, ava means downward, in the sense of something that comes down, an end product, a result. Every nakshatra has an avastat, the thing it wants to produce, like an egg falling out and down from a bird. The avastat identifies the thing you will get if you stand below a nakshatra with your arms open. Right? Especially if you do the action, if you fuel the nakshatra with the parastat that it needs. You know, we could even say that any qualitative, positive energy potential in a person's chart, like when a person's got like a high moon energy in Shadbala, it's well placed and it's like their ascendant lord, all these things can show that a person has like a strong moon, especially the Shadbala of the moon. Then if in astrology, if we find that one of the nakshatra sutras requires something that relates to moon energy, like let's say maybe like Hasta, or I wouldn't be able to think of it off the top of my head, maybe like Uttara Falguni, which requires a sensitivity to the other person in relationship. You know, there are certain of the nakshatra requirements can be seen in other planetary things, in other parts of astrology, or just in your life. You know, if you just happen to live with a certain archetypal theme in your brain, that could be fuel for one of the nakshatras that could produce wealth and abundance in your life. Or if you have an underabundance, if you've got so much of one type of consciousness that you lose out on another type, if you're so lunar, so moony, so emotional that you lack the discernment and discipline to be a harsh person, maybe some nakshatras that require harshness, that require a discerning, unattached, unemotional mind, will lack the proper needs and therefore be obstructed in giving the results that nakshatra might want to produce. So the nakshatras are really in astrology all unto themselves. And they all represent things that human beings can find value and use in. And that's why Vic gives the Nakshatra Sutras in this way, that it's not necessarily just for the sake of astrology. We can read each sutra and see a little bit of life wisdom as to something that we ought to be employing in our lives for our fullest bliss. One final introductory note. This is him talking about sutra consciousness. Sutras, by design, they compact volumes of meaning and information into very few, carefully chosen and well-crafted words. Titaria, the author of the Titaria Brahmana and its Nakshatra Sutra, has distilled volumes of information about each nakshatra into just 6 or occasionally 7 words. Patient, careful, and deep contemplation is needed to fully unlock the wonderful wisdom and extremely useful astrological symbolism woven within these sutras. And of course, we know that it's supposed to be enigmatic. It's supposed to be confounding, because the nature of these sutras is made so that we can sit with it, digest it, and contemplate on the essence of the meaning of the words, how it reflects in everyone's life and particularly in our lives. It's only by this slow digesting can we get at the energy of the nakshatra, so that when we speak to it and when we integrate it in our own astrological practice, we aren't just hand-picking symbols that seem to make sense together, because that's where you get into trouble. You need to know the energy of the nakshatra so that your symbols that you choose to describe them through are appropriate to the true energy of the nakshatra. You know, if you decide that you're talking about Punarvasu and you decide to use the symbolism of water in your symbolism, you know, you need to know what that water is really symbolizing, and that it doesn't symbolize the same water that we would expect from the symbolism of Scorpio as a water sign. Punarvasu's water means something completely different. Now, someone who's just trying to read the sutras and connect symbols by their external forms, they might say, Scorpio's a water sign and Punarvasu is watery. Maybe they might relate to each other. That's what we're trying to stop here. The buck stops here in the modern advent of a true scriptural authority which understands the energy of the nakshatra. Once you understand the energy and what these symbols symbolize, then you can wheel and deal with the symbols and be a proper integrated astrologer who can properly integrate the nakshatras into your tropical-based, Rashi-based, 12-sign zodiac practice as a natal astrologer. Gotta love that Vic Dicara. Very clarifying. I can't wait for you guys to join me in the coming episodes as we talk more about the nakshatras as individually, and as we begin to go through the sutras ourselves and contemplate for ourselves the rich meaning that has been embedded in each one. Hope you guys dug this little preamble. I'm Dustin Cormier, and this is How to Rock Astrology. Tune in next time, folks, as we continue our series on the nakshatras and unfold the bliss that is inherent within us all. Keep your eyes on the skies, folks, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much for watching.